morning, and welcome to another episode of Access All Areas of Send. Today I'm joined by John and Steve, and we are going to talk about what it's like to be a dad who happens to be a parent carer. And for those who are not sure, or just as a gentle reminder of what a parent carer is, a parent carer is a person who has parental responsibilities, who provides unpaid care and support to a child or adult child who cannot manage without help due to illness, disability, mental health issues, or substance misuse. This care goes beyond normal parenting duties, frequently involving daily tasks like washing, feeding, and supervising safety. Um, so, do you think that is a good definition of a parent carer? And can you see any parallels to what you do on a day-to-day basis? I know that's a big question for the first question, but I'm sure you two know the answer to these things.
It's interesting because I was chatting to a new parent yesterday I met, and they didn't think of themselves as a parent carer, and it got me thinking of when did I think of myself as a parent carer as opposed to a parent, and it was probably when I had to give up work when our son became neat, so that was 2018. Otherwise, I suppose I just considered myself, I was a normal parent, normal husband, working, and happened to have a SEN child because I can't honestly remember when I first came across the phrase parent carer. And it was probably after lockdown when things opened up and I went to South Gloss Parent Carers that I kind of heard the phrase, realized what it meant and what its definitions broadly were. So that's probably my journey in a nutshell, as it were.
And I think unless you've had a number of children before, you are just a parent. And
Yeah.
it's almost like you say, that reflecting from other people that you go, oh, what do you mean this is not the same for other people? And I remember for us, it was, filling in the forms that you get in triplicate from the government when you're applying for different grants or other things, and you've got to get an expert, as it were, to sign off on certain aspects
Yeah.
there. And you're discussing it with them, and they're saying things like, but you don't realize what you do. You don't realize the stages that you put in before you leave the house to make sure that it's as smooth as possible. Other people don't do that. And you're going, oh, well, they don't. And so I think it's that slow realization sometimes that what you do, although it's right for you and your family, and it's built up over a learnt period of time that you go, this is what we need to do to be able to have this function work. It's only when other people sort of reflect that back to you that you go, oh, that's not normal. Oh, okay, right, that's fine. And it's strange. And I know we've had a conversation before where I talk about, for us, you're leaving the house or going somewhere. We have to give our son multiple warnings or time periods where we say, get ready, we're doing this.
Mm.
And even if it's something that we're doing specifically for him that he wants to do, we can't just turn around and say, right, in 3 minutes you need to get your shoes on and get out the door, because he will lock down and sort of really not cope with that, even though it's something he wants to do and he knows that there's a deadline and a start time, and if we miss it, it's not possible. So there are strange things that you just think, well, that's just the way it's done. And it's only when other people sort of reflect back and go, no, 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 that's not the way it's done. That's sort of, okay, maybe I am as much of a carer as I am a parent. But I think all parents are carers in some ways.
Yeah.
But for that sort of special needs child, you go above and beyond based on the needs of your particular child.
I think that above and beyond is a really good way of putting it, John, because we've got a neurotypical elder daughter. So we had a comparator with our son, and very early on, as I've mentioned before, we spotted, or I spotted, something was different, and so we got the diagnosis around the age of 5 or nearly 6. And it is, when does being a parent shift into being a parent carer. And I've been thinking about this since our last conversation, and I suppose it's like I said earlier, when Thomas became neat, it became starkly obvious that once you were out of that lovely, safe for us school environment where you knew from reception year to year 16, well, sorry, not year 16, till he was 16, post 16 education was a disaster. But you knew everything that was going to happen, and it was all easy, and everything seems to be fine, and you can coping. And then you fall off the cliff edge at 18, and then suddenly I think that's when you massively shift from being a parent to being a parent carer, because you're still dad, you're still doing all the stuff you would kind of expect to be doing for a 16, 18-year-old. But then you suddenly realize, actually, I'm doing stuff that I was doing for him when he was 5, but he's 18. I mean, he's now nearly 26. And I think it's that when you leave the education system, for me, it became really stark, the lack of support, because Thomas went to a special school, special needs school, which was brilliant. Kind of all the support was there. Whatever we needed, we could ask the school. There was a good working relationship. When that finishes, you're suddenly in this whole new world that it's like Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. No one's prepared you for this. And then you massively realize you are a carer as well as being a parent. And then you're suddenly having to find out so much stuff and it's like we talked about before. In my situation, I had to give up work to become the full-time carer because there's nothing. There's no I mean, so a lot of this became as a surprise to me. There's no legal duty on the local authority to provide care or support after 18 when they're adults, unless they've had a Care Act assessment. So everything seems to be you feel like your train has been going lovely, going blah, blah, and then you're derailed, and it's like, how can I get back on track? But I've got no one to help me repair the track, get the train there, and where are we going? So like, when we spoke last time, you said you're thinking you're going to Italy, and suddenly you find yourself in Holland. Lovely as it is, but it's like this real a sea change in how you view everything, and then how society views you. You're on an incredibly steep learning curve. Well, that's how I found it.
And did you see, Steve, when you gave up work, or when you had that shift, that again you've got that, well, hang on a minute, what do you mean you're the dad that looks after your child? Was that a big sort of mental shift for you as well?
On two levels. One, when Thomas got the diagnosis, I became really boring, logical, methodical. I could switch off being dad and switch into, so this is pre-internet or very early days in the internet. So we had an A4 sheet of paper with a list of contacts, and that was it. So I was able to sort of separate myself into sort of two personalities, where I'm dealing with the send system in inverted commas, and then switching over to being dad. I think what hit me was, as we discussed before, when it was either attendant carers allowance or disability living allowance we applied for, and this lady turned up to see us as a family, because obviously they have to interview Tom. And then I said, I'm going to be Thomas's care or appointed person, whatever the phrase was. And she was like, oh, I've never had that before. I need your wife's permission. And I was really like, I'm not going to swear on here, but you can imagine internally some Anglo-Saxon expletives going on. And I was like, really? And I was like, you're having a giraffe here, mate. And that's when you suddenly realized how And I was discussing this with our daughter recently, and we talked about it before, that as a dad, the stereotype in society is you're not the primary carer. So if I say fireman, I say doctor, I say nurse, I say bin man, you've got male, female, you've got these massive stereotypes, and the carer is mum. So I touched on it before when Thomas was in A&E recently, and in other situations. Oh, is this your guardian? And you are. Nobody thinks I'm dad because Thomas is mixed race, and my daughter and I were chatting about this. She was at Edinburgh Uni doing psychology, and we were out having pizza and went to pay, and the waitress said, do you want separate bills? And we were like, really? It's like, I'm a sugar daddy. They didn't think I'm dad. And we were like, this is so embarrassing. I mean, it was so embarrassing for her. And I was like, really? So pretty much anywhere I go, nobody thinks I'm dad or the primary carer. And it brings it home to you that, despite all this talk about we're inclusive, etc., when push comes to shove, we're not. We still are, in many ways, no different in the 70s or 80s, where you've got these very stereotyped, gender-based roles, and if you step across them, it can confuse people.
And I know, for us, we kind of double down on those stereotypes because we were living abroad and we came back to the UK, and it was my wife who, I got the job in the UK and carried on working, and it was my wife who took our son to school and started seeing all of the differences, and things are a little bit different. And she was the one that started then with the school and the support of the teachers to get the diagnosis. And I kind of left her all to it. And for me, it was that, right, I've got to double down. I've got to make sure I've got the job. I've got to make sure the money's coming in, because actually this is a path where she's really going to have to look after our son. And I've got to go into that stereotypical role model of I've got to have the career, I've got to do this, I've got to earn enough money. How do I earn enough money for our life, our retirement, his life going forwards? All of that comes. And then it came to a point where my wife was kind of like, yeah, but you don't see our son. Yeah, you're off early in the morning, or you're getting on a plane, or you're flying around the world, you're doing these kind of things. We need to rebalance this, and that the money's less important. Let's focus on us as a family and what we need. And then it was a strange world of me sort of stepping into this going, this is my son, but I don't necessarily recognize this world and the other aspects of it.
Yeah.
And then as you start taking more involvement, then, like you say, you've got the people looking at your child a bit differently. And I've got to a point now where I really don't care about that. But they also look at you a bit differently. As you say, it's like, what do you mean mum's not here? What do you mean you're the one coming to the event or doing something? As my wife now has got the job, and I'm doing something else, but also spending more and more time with our son. That it is that strange part that, as you say, people do that sort of double take and think, Dad, okay, right.
And do you think as well, because I think it's really important from a man's perspective, and I'm only thinking about my experience. So my dad was the primary parent in my childhood for various reasons. And do you think it is quite a shift? I mean, Steve, you've talked about the stereotypical conversations around getting, mum's permission to have you on board, and you, John, as well, about the different aspect of, like, being the money maker, and that pressure, that huge pressure of providing for your family, and then having a different outlook and a different perspective. I mean, it is quite a shift, isn't it? Not just because other people make comments which are really sort of are important, but they're not in equal measure. But also to do, and I think this is really important as well, around a man's masculinity and also mental health, because humans are social. I think men are social too, and men need other men. How has that played out? I mean, that's a big question as well, isn't it? But
Yeah,
how has that played out? Because I think that's the $1 million question. And if you could bottle what it means and how you get round it for men, I think that would in itself would be a moneymaker. But how has that shift been huge, or has it actually not been as huge as you thought or anticipated?
I think
I
it's. Oh, sorry, Steve. Yeah,
I don't I mean I stepped down from quite a senior management role within the design company around 2008 because I just couldn't carry on running, say, 10, 12 projects in my head, managing a team of people, and then doing all the paperwork, etc., etc. Um, and there was that, but that's your wife's job sort of attitude from some of the senior management, I will say, not all. Um, and I think it has got better. I think it's still got a hell of a long way to go, if I'm honest. It's it is getting there, but it's that, and I again chatting with some parents, as you know, I volunteer with South Gloss Parent Carers, and a lot of the time they say the problem is getting their husbands on board or getting them to meetings or stuff like that. Because as John said, when you're under so much pressure to pay the mortgage, provide the bills, all that, you don't have time um, to do anything else. And I was thinking, normally when you come home after work, it's your safe space, your haven, you can relax. No, you come back from work and then you're moving into your second job that is at times even more stressful and incredibly unpredictable than your normal work. So you never get I never had a chance to switch off. And I think that's a huge issue. And with regards to say that the social aspect, my wife and I were talking about this couple of days ago, and I was thinking, so Thomas was in mainstream till year two, then he moved to specialist school, special needs school. So up to year two, he was invited to other birthday parties. So we kind of mixed and had a few people over. You hit special needs school, zilch, because the kids just don't mix. Um, so my wife still has all her antenatal group network and the school's group network from when our daughter was at school. We have none of that for Thomas. So moving in, I know obviously the mums from our daughter's year, but I've got no social life. Like I jokingly said before, Lidl and Asda and South Gloss Parent Carers. That's my social life because classically, I've got the phone next to me waiting for the next bit to hit the fan and find out what I've got to do.
I think
You saying you're off to celebrate today. I can't have a drink because I never know when the phone's going to go, and I might have to drive 10 miles and do whatever it is. So, I always feel like I'm the fireman. I'm waiting for that call. I don't know when, I don't know where I'm going, how long it's going to be, how severe it's going to be. And this would be the same for mums, of course, but I think it's not something you expect to do, and society doesn't expect you to do it. So again, it goes back to these societal tropes and stereotypes that haven't shifted to the reality of many families these days, with the role reversal John talked about, because my wife is the primary earner now, and I'm the parent carer.
and I think some of it is, when you look at the statistics of families that break down, and you look and you think it's just by luck. And to be honest, my wife was the rock in our family, And she was the one that was having that discussion with me and Steve. You talk about that coming home part. I think it's phenomenal the amount of tag team work that you have to
Yeah.
do, because sometimes you come home and the person that's been there is just drained, and that they've been involved in this sort of intense care and support, or discussions with the child, and the new person coming in has just got that little bit extra of energy that they have to step into
Mhm.
this. But going back to the question, I think it's, I look at myself, and I just instantly went into, right, I've got to plan this, I've got to do this. How do I do this? This is my role, and that's it. This is my wife's role. And I think it was only by the skills and sort of the grace of my wife that she was able to go, but we don't need that as a father figure
Mm.
as much as we need this. We
Yeah.
need you to be a bit more present. We need you to actually be that influence of a boy that's growing up, because regardless of his additional needs, he's got that fundamental sort of boy needs a bit more man discussions to
Yeah.
have those aspects there. And again, that may be stereotypical, but I think there's just little bits that my wife was saying that's a bit lacking in his life. How do we put more of that in
Mm.
there? And over time, you realize that actually, if I drop dead tomorrow, work will carry on. They'll replace me,
Yeah.
and you're just, I wouldn't say insignificant, but relative to the significance that you have with your family,
Yeah.
you then sort of stop and go, right, how can we do this better? And I think that's the bit that we were incredibly lucky that my wife and I went on this journey together, taking different roles. But she was able to drag me back to, this is what the family needs, and how it works. And so we've evolved by communication and working together. And I still think we get more wrong than we get right. But each time we get that little bit better, and we get that bit of a understanding there. And
Yeah.
we've got friends that are doing this journey by themselves. And I just think that is a phenomenal sort of battle there that they've got going on. And it's the intensity that I think other families don't quite understand sometimes, that it never
I,
switches off.
yeah,
And
that intensity is so true. You can never switch off. That massive part of your brain is always in, ready to hit the ground running, emergency send parent mode. So, as you know, Thomas is now living in supported independent living. So rather than it's 30 seconds to walk upstairs to sort something out, it's now a 10-mile drive. And depending on the traffic in Bristol, that could be an hour and a half, 2 hours. So that, and that tag team is very true. But when my wife comes home, I feel sorry for her because she's shattered. And she, just like I used to come home shattered because she's a TA in school. And I just want to make sure she can rest because I know from when I was working, I needed the rest to go out the next day and bring in the money to keep things going. So seeing it from the other side is really useful. But again, I don't have that social network because my social network was work and I had really good friends, but we were working all hours God sends. But now, we've all sort of gone our separate ways. And sometimes, and again, come the evening or late afternoon, evening, you're so tired. All you want to do is vegetate some days, put the telly on, and just let your brain unwind because it, it is hard. And when I talk to many single parents, because like you say, John, the pressures on families is huge. I said, I feel sorry for you because you don't get a break. At least my wife and I can tag team. But yeah, having that positive role model at home, and like you say, yeah, you drop dead tomorrow, the company will carry on running, but you're irreplaceable as dad. So again, I think that's one reason I realized I needed to step back around 2008, 2010, just because I needed. If I don't look after myself, how can I look after the rest of the family? So it's not only being a parent carer, but it's dad to our daughter, husband to my wife, see my friends occasionally. And you suddenly realize that, yes, actually moving to a 4 bedroom house or whatever actually isn't really that important at the minute. It's getting a good night's sleep, having a good day without the proverbial hitting the fan. Those are the things that are really important. And then as you move down, as your journey progresses, you can start doing things like I said before. Last year my wife and I finally went on holiday together to see our daughter and her lovely partner in France. And it was like, but that's taken 25 years. But we've been able to do it. And my God, our daughter said she's never seen me look so relaxed
Mm.
because I know I'm not going to get that Dan Brown envelope through the door. I don't have any emails to sort out. I deliberately just take the phone so I can speak to Thomas each night. Otherwise, I could switch off. And because I was so physically removed, I was able to do it. But when I'm here, I can never switch off. And it's hard to get through to other families what it's like, other than I say, well, you imagine when you've got a 2-year-old and they're having terrible tantrums, but you imagine having 24 years of that. And I said, that's not even scratching the surface of what it's like. It's only talking with other Send parents can you truly find someone who can relate to everything and not judge you.
Yes, yeah. And it's strange, like you say, that there's bits where the sense of humor is slightly different because you know that you can say things that other people will just get, and
Yeah.
there's no kind of stigma meant, there's no kind of judgment meant on this. You're
Yeah.
just saying this is what it was like, this is what's happened yesterday, and this is how I feel about it.
Yeah.
And they just kind of go, uh-huh, yeah, fine. And you kind of chuckle and move on. So
Yeah.
it is fine to find that community, as it were, that
I think
get it.
that and again, talking to this new parent yesterday, they were just like, oh my God, I didn't realize there was so many other parent carers. And this person didn't think they were a parent carer until chatting with other people. They realized they were because, single parent, one child, that's all they know.
Hmm.
But when you meet other people, it puts it in perspective what you're actually doing. But it's like, I said before, Donald Rumsfeld's famous quote, the unknown's unknowns.
Mm.
And until you have a chat with someone who's in the same position, do you realize actually what you're doing, the impact it has on your SMEH, your family, etc., etc. And having those brutally honest and open conversations is so good because, like last week, I was so tired. And it was one of those times where I was just like, do you know what? I'm tired of being a parent carer. My life seems to be, I'm defined as a parent carer. I have no life aside from parent carer. And you think, I've had enough. And you can't get off the bus. You have to stay on the bus. But sometimes talking to other people and go, yeah, completely get it. Because another colleague was like that the week before. And so I could say, I feel just like you were.
Yeah, and as you say, then it's a case of, right, you finished your coffee, now get back to it. Because you've had your 2-minute break and that's it. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, stop moaning, like that the week before. And so I could say, I feel just like you were.
Yeah, and as you say, then it's a case of, right, you finished your coffee, now get back to it. Because you've had your 2-minute break and that's it. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, stop moaning, so all this patriarchy you've got, stop moaning, man up and go and carry on.
Yeah, and
But
oh, sorry,
I was just going to say that's the problem though, Steve, isn't it? Because that has been the attitude of society for a long time, is that you just man up. It's a bit like as women saying you put your big girly pants on and just get on with it. Actually, we need to be better at acknowledging the feelings, the exhaustion, the sort of the brain dump of life in general. And this is not just for parent carers, but I think it's more pertinent for parent carers because it doesn't matter the age of the child, you are still going to be their parent carer they can move out, like you say, Steve. Thomas is independent, living in independent living, but you're still doing stuff for him, and you're on call. You're like the fireman fighting fires.
Mm.
But I think, we need to acknowledge better around the mental load that this can take. And I think women, really do struggle. I've seen single women that are parent carers, but they just roll up the sleeves and get on with it. And I think men are the same. But there is that slight difference, I think, with women talking to other women and having that close proximity of friends who understand it. And you're right,
Mm.
it's very difficult to find that. And I think listening to men and listening to you guys as well, when we've had our chats, I think it's harder for men to do that. I don't know why. Um, but maybe it's down to that social thing of man up. We don't talk about our feelings, but the 80% of SEN families that are married or are in a civil partnership, or are living together or whatever, they do split up because of the pressures of the SEN
Yeah.
stuff on top of their everyday life. There's groups now where they're literally called Men Walking and Talking, and they are huge. They're all over the country.
Mm.
And I do wonder if it's just because of that aspect of men are social, but they don't want to talk about their feelings because that's not a manly thing to do. And I think we do need to acknowledge that actually the mental load of being a parent carer is huge. And as men, you need that space. You need to go, do you know what? I've had such a week. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Mm.
And that's fine. That's actually fine to do. So how do we, if there's a man listening to this podcast who doesn't know that he's a parent carer yet, or is about to learn, or has just found out, or has been one for years, and he's struggling with that mental load, what would you say, being in that you've been on the coal face for that? Steve, you've been in the coal face of that for quite a few years.
Mm.
John, you've been on it for years as well, but not as long as Steve. So how
Mhm.
how do we manage that, the expectations, and also just to acknowledge that it's okay, as long as you go and talk to somebody. If you're feeling that, go and talk to somebody.
I think it's like we talked about it before, John, that when you've had a long day at work, the last thing you want to do is go out to the pub and chat with other blokes. You're just so tired. You want to have your evening meal, vegetate on the sofa, go to sleep. I mean, for me, going to the parent carer group has been brilliant. And I say to them, I wish I'd known about you when you were set up in 2010, because that would have helped us on as a whole family on the journey no end. But just being able to talk with other parent carers, no matter their gender, whatever, is hugely beneficial because we all get it. And funnily enough, I become a sounding board for frustrated parents with their husbands. Oh, my husband's driving me mad. It's like I'm the dad Samaritan sort of
Do you know
thing.
all the answers?
Um,
Do you know all the answers to
of
help all
course I
these?
do. I'm a white male. I know everything. Um, I think it's just having that ability to have a chat with whomever, whether your husband's driving you nuts. You could ask my wife this, and she would say, "God, yeah." Um, I know Bristol Autism Support do dad meetups twice a month at pubs, and like we talked about before, John. Actually, when I finished work, the last thing I wanted to do was go out the house again and talk about send, because I'm living it constantly. But I think for maybe that's because my age, the era I grew up in, maybe it's different for younger men now because we're more open about mental health. Like the firemen have done a campaign about talking about mental health. The slightly off topic, but the local bin men in South Gloss have been trained to look for signs of domestic abuse. So we are kind of being more aware of it, getting to, we talked about this before. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you've got to have that water there ready for when someone
Mm.
is prepared to do it. But I think it then needs a shift within, say, schools, local governments, to recognize dads as parent carers and their needs. And then to be fair to our local authority, they have finally started realizing they need to engage with all family members, but especially dads, where it's been very much they would see the mum for the reasons we've talked about. But reaching people, etc., is always going to be tricky. But I think you have to offer the services and recognize the I think especially, remember, again, it goes back to these societal stereotypes and tropes that we are the breadwinners, we're meant to man up. No, people, if I'd said about my mental health 10, 15 years ago, they would have been like, get over it, move on. Now there would be much more, okay, let's find a quiet place, go and chat.
But I think you're coming back to the point of what would I say to another uh, man out there, it would just be, well, let's have a chat and go from there. Because for me, the thought, years ago of walking into a village hall or an organizational event where, Steve, as you know, you walk in and you go, right, there's 80% women here. Right, okay. Do do I feel natural here? No. For me, the easiest bit was, our son, the same, goes to a bit of a different school, shall we say, and I look
Mm,
at that and I go, some of these parents get it. And so you'll be able to have that one-to-one chat with another father that I think is an easier, just general sort of conversation, that when you can go, does your child do this? Yeah. "Oh, okay, mine too. That's a
mm,
bit strange. How do you do that? What do you do when they're rolling around on the floor or doing things differently there? That I think that one-to-one part is brilliant. That I think people can open up when they don't feel like there's 10 faces looking at them, or there's
mm,
that sort of judgment, because they know that you get it. We had a New Year's event that we took our son to, and it was the case of going, right, you really want to go to this, but you can't cope with the noise, you can't cope with the people there. And I spent most of that evening under the table with my son, just lying there while he's watching what's going on,
mm,
having those conversations there. And some people walking past going, it's a bit strange, that's it. But there was one particular family there that got it, because they had a child of a similar kind
mm,
of disposition, that when I was out from under the table, was able to have those sort of conversations there. And you realize that, okay, yeah, maybe it's not normal. Maybe it is different.
mm,
But for us, it's our life. And I think that's the bit that you start to open out on, or conversations that Steve and I have here, that you just go, okay. So for me, if you are worried about going into that big hall or joining that big group, or that local
mm,
authority event there, okay, don't do that. Find maybe that one situation where you can have a chat with another dad and go, how does this work for you? What do you do there?
mm,
And I think through those little conversations, and they might go, hang on a minute, let's pull in Steve because he knows a bit more about that. Or, yeah, this happened to me and this is what was
mm,
going on there. And you realize that, okay, okay, it may not be normal, for want of a better word, but it is within the community what happens and what you have to do. So I think it's finding those little discussions that you can have, maybe one on one,
mm,
before you start breaching out into that wider world there. And I think it took me some time before, even sort of outside when I wasn't with my son, to say to people, yeah, well, I'm a father of an autistic child, and this is what it means. And then you were able to have sort of different conversations with other
mm.
people based on your perspective, and feel more comfortable with
Yeah, yeah.
with that.
I think it's when I first went to the parent carer group, and I'm still pretty much the only bloke whoever goes. I think there's probably been 5 dads in 5 years have turned up. To me, it wasn't a problem. It's just finding people with the same experience and just chatting. But sometimes, yeah, a dad wants to talk to another dad. So I think, one thing you could do is be like, schools be more open, because when I walk past where my wife works, it is 95% the mums at the school gate and the odd dad dropping the kid off, dashing into the car and whizzing off to work. Um, I think certainly because of, the mum bringing up the child after childbirth, it all sort of naturally flows. Mums get all and like you said, dads are doing all the work. So we kind of miss out, I think, a lot on those connections that the mums are naturally doing. So, like I said, my wife's still in touch with all of the antenatal group. I think it's rather like, I think it's just getting the message out there through local authorities, schools, parent care groups, and, fair play to Bristol Autism Support, that they do offer it twice a month. But we used to do online stuff at South Gloss Parent Carers, and we stopped doing it because very, very few people attended for a lot of the reasons we talked about. 7 o'clock in the evening, you're either struggling with bath time or bedtime or whatever. But I think, even if one dad, as a result of this podcast, contacts someone's support, we've done our job. And then they might pass the info on and so on and so forth. But I know from talking to other parents, because I could throw a stone from where I live and hit a send family. We happen to have quite a high proportion across the road from us and on our road. But getting them to actually turn up to a group, it's that journey of the 1,000 miles. The first step is the hardest, and once they cross the door, the threshold, they suddenly realize, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for.
But
And
is
the
it
same would be for
because,
the dads.
yeah, is it because when you look at the stats there, you go, there are a lot of people out there that are very similar. There are a lot of families out there that are very similar
Yeah.
to varying degrees. And I think it's the bit that before it was never talked about, or never sort of, nobody looked under the rug to see what was there. And I think that's part of it that, we've spoken about, my son's diagnosis. And for me, even at the start, it was like, well, I don't see the need for a diagnosis. And maybe even as far to say I didn't want a diagnosis because I didn't want a label. And then sitting down with the doctor, and she was saying, well, why wouldn't you want to know? Why wouldn't you want to be able to prepare for this and understand that world and see what was going on? And that was a dramatic shift. And the old me before, like I say, would never have even contemplated that. So I think there's a lot of families out there that it's not even related to the stigma, but it's related to the, well, I don't know enough about that world. It's a bit scary or a bit different to put a specific label on my child. And that might mean that we're looked at a bit differently. So I don't want to do that. And that's why I think the first bit for me is that you just recognize some similarities and start to
Yeah.
have that sort of one-to-one sort of conversation. And then, as I say, for me, it was recognizing that, okay, let's find out what that label could mean.
Yeah.
And it's not about what benefits are there, or what sort of groups are there, but it's like, okay, now I can understand maybe just a little bit of how my son thinks and why he thinks a bit differently. So,
Yeah.
right, how do I prepare for that? And how do I adjust the way that I work with him based on his view of the world, or his sort of processing of bits of information there? And I'll have that conversation with him to go, how should I have done that better? What can we discuss here? What about next time? How do we do this? Because this is how I see it. You see it very differently. Right. How do we find those bridges? And I think it's those bits with other fathers to go, don't be afraid to say, hang on a minute, something's a bit different here. Help. What's going on? Who do I know that I can ask about this? And often it's, be it a mother or a father, or just a single parent there with a similar kind of child, that I think it's amazing if you just ask somebody that they very quickly turn around and go, yeah, I'll tell you about this. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is what's going on. And yeah, I know, for us, we've talked about, going to down the motorways, stopping off at the service station and thinking, is it clear? Please, nobody put the hand dryer on,
Yeah.
because if you washed your hands, right, I've got to prepare my son because he may
Yeah.
be okay, or that noise might just be what tips
It's
him over.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, like I've done miles with my kids, and interestingly, sometimes with my husband in tow, who isn't neurotypical, I am, he isn't. Um, and interestingly, my autistic son would come into the ladies' toilets because I could manage it better until he was older, and then he
Mm.
was fine to go in with dad. But it's really interesting, and I'm listening to you both thinking all the years that I've run support groups, and I did them for over 10 years. And I've met mostly women, you're right, mostly women, but I have had a smattering of dads come through the door. And when I listen to you, what I find is that there are so many commonalities with women, with mums as well as dads. And I think you're right. I think it's the thought of going somewhere
Yeah.
and meeting somebody for the first time, and not sure how people are going to judge you or make comment around your life experiences as a parent. And
Mhm.
actually, most of the time, when we did this the support group, there was definitely conversations around what they were having difficulties with. Usually it was support in schools, sometimes it was how to get an EHCP, sometimes it was about annual review, sometimes it was around DLA or PIP paperwork. But the majority of the conversations were around normal life. What was on TV, what TV shows you were watching. Did you see this on social media? And it was because they just wanted a break from their everyday life. They
Mm.
didn't necessarily want to talk about their child. They didn't necessarily want to talk about the issues and the struggles because they had somebody else to talk to about that. What they didn't have was the normality of a friendship, which I think is quite incredibly telling of the relationships that form once your child has been diagnosed. I mean, I remember a long time ago when my son was diagnosed, and the amount of people and the friendships that I lost because of that, or
Mm.
the lack of invites to birthday parties at school, because you talked about it, Steve, about,
Yeah.
once your child attends the special school, you don't get invites anyway because you're not in the playground. Equally, my child was at mainstream, and I can count on one hand the amount of invites he had to birthday parties over the 7 or 8 years he was at school, for the exact same reason as you, John. I mean, I've spent times underneath tables supporting a child who wanted to go to a party, but didn't manage the noise or didn't manage the flashing lights or had a sensory implode, shall we say. um, I think we like to do things differently for men because men are different to women for sure, or we don't want to forget about the men, so we do a group for everybody, and then maybe they'll do a group for men.
Mm.
And we talked about this, didn't we, around the pubs, football, which neither of you like, which is funny because my husband doesn't like football either. um so what, is there something fundamentally different that we can do for men? And I say we, I mean, it could be any organisation, it could be a parent care forum, because I know they do men's groups and struggle with people turning up, Steve. So
Mm.
we've talked about that. Um, or any organisation that just goes, do you know what? I want to focus on the men, make sure that they're okay, because you are, some of you, are working full time. Some of you have decided to do that role swap, so your wife is, or partner's going out to work, and you're now doing the stay at home stuff as much as you can. Or those, we're all juggling work roles or volunteering roles on
Mm.
top of our caring responsibilities. So is there anything that we're missing that actually could be helpful to men? Or do you think it's just a case of men going, do you know what, I do need to talk to somebody, I do need to be around other people, I do need a break from my caring responsibilities? You know, what is it that we're missing? Is there anything we're missing, do you think?
I think looking at the journey we've been on, I think the support is out there. And I think we touched upon it, John, last time we talked, and we touched upon it here as well. It's actually physically having the time to attend a meeting. So, I mentioned before that I started doing a reduced working week because I needed to be available for meetings with social care workers or whomever. That impacted my career and stuff like that. But you have to start doing those things. And sometimes things aren't on at a time that's convenient for you as a family or a location that you can get to. I think for any organization, I think, I mentioned it before, when we did all the accessibility for wheelchairs and physically disabled people in the 80s, we kind of need to start doing that as a society for SEND. And I mentioned the I Swear film before we started recording. I imagine that's going to massively raise the awareness of Tourette's syndrome because it's something you never really see on TV. I mean, Channel 4 did a couple of brilliant documentaries some years ago. But I think it's any organization thinking, how can we, and it could be geographical issues, funding issues, timing issues. How can we provide support for men, whether that's like a one-to-one meeting, online meeting, or information leaflets specifically tailored for men, and then see why aren't we able to access it. And that, a lot of the reasons we've touched upon, but I think all organizations need to maybe have a good hard think on how can we make it more accessible. But then again, looking at my experience, a lot of the stuff we do for all families would work for men. Whether you can get them to turn up is often the issue. We have the same issue with mums turning up for all the same reasons. But I think for men who, in my experience, are still the sole breadwinners in a family with a child with SEND, it is quite hard. But, I think I mentioned in the last time we had a chat that LinkedIn post where there was the boardroom, 1950s, 1960s boardroom, 12 men, the chairman and a secretary. Next day, someone posted a SEND get together and it was 2 men, 12 women. And I'm thinking, we're not being heard.
But I think things like this, Tina, are reflective of actually what can be done now in terms of just the podcasts that you find. And as you start scratching the surface, you go, well, these are a couple of SEND dads just having conversation. And again, being brutally honest about the good, the bad, the ugly. Or this is a parent here, and it may be aimed at women, but a lot of it's very relevant to me. Or this is a parent just doing little TikTok skits. And so I think normalizing some of that and building that little community there, as you say, enables men to just dip in to that part of it and see. And Steve, you say you're tired when you come home from work, or there's other things going on, or you look and you go, that could be interesting. Oh yeah, 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, right? Doesn't fit into my work schedule.
Doesn't quite work.
Yeah, so it's the bit, because I often smile when people talk about TV programs, because I think we don't watch too much TV, but actually I do grab a snippet of YouTube here or a bit of something there because that fits into my time or my schedule. And I think it's those little bits that you go through normalizing this, because I found that community. I feel that I'm not alone, as it were. And then I think there is that onus to go, right, how can you make it so that is not only accessible to view, but accessible to to comment or to be able to reach out and have
Yeah.
some of those conversations, be it an online conversation, be it a little video chat, or be it leaving messages here, that people feel that they can do that without having to go, I've got to rearrange my world because I've got to give up my job because this meeting's at this time. I think it's having that adaptability. So I think podcasts like this and other podcasts really help to sort of break down some of those barriers there. But I think there is a little bit of that individual self-reflection that it's hard because you have to go, I think I need to speak to somebody about this, or I think I want to speak to somebody about this because is this normal? And, I know that when I tried to have conversations with my dad, the sort of looks that came back were, he was of an era, and
Yeah.
it was a case of
Yeah.
just knuckle down and get on with this. And you kind of go, okay, but that's not
And
working.
exactly, and that has been part of the problem, hasn't it? Is exactly that. It's the man up. It's, you're in this. This is your life. Just get on with it. And I think, it's so important for men to talk to other people. It doesn't have to be another man if that's not what you want to do. It's just talking through. And anybody who has any parent carer come to them, whether they're male or female. We don't want pity. We do not want sympathy, but what we do want is empathy. And you can't put, you can't gauge sometimes what it's like to be in our shoes. Um, it is difficult. Sometimes we have to make choices very last minute. So we might promise that we're going to be at an event, and at the very last minute, we might have to change our minds, not because we want to, but because we have no choice but to do that. And I think, anybody listening to this that wants to help somebody else, or they know somebody else who's struggling, just bear that in mind. And always, from I'm very lucky. I've got an amazing group of friends, some of which are carers. Is just be there for one another when somebody wants to have a chat, but also, be humorous. It's not, we talked about it, didn't we, very briefly, around the dark, warped sense of humor that carers often have to get through this time. Just let's have a joke, let's have a laugh, and let's group together. Let's swap over. So you can have a drink, Stephen. Or you talked about it being on call or whatever. It is around community. It is around shifting. It is around supporting each other. It is as simple as, and if you're a friend of somebody in this situation, you know, just just tell them, just say to them, if you need a chat, if you need something, they probably won't take you up on it because we're stubborn. But just offer it, and like I say, just it that's all it takes. And you're right, Steve. If one person listens to this podcast and acknowledges that they're struggling and goes and gets some help, or have a chat with a cup of tea, or over a pint of beer, or whatever floats your boat, and we've supported them and they've gone and got some help and support, that's all that matters, isn't it? It's just that simple.
I think, yeah, also the bit to consider, because I know for me, I very quickly got over the fear that I had, that it was like, well, my child's more special than your child. And that thought where you'd be like, oh, I can't talk to them because their child's got this condition or that condition, and oh, that looks more different than mine. Is that everybody goes, well, my journey's different to you. I'm not in your footsteps, but let's talk about this part of it where it overlaps, or another thing there. And I've been really pleasantly amazed that, when I have just reached across to certain families that get it, that they're just really open and they're really happy to talk about, well, actually there's this support available, or there's this, or what could you do there. And nobody really cares about that level of difference. It's just a case of going, yeah, okay, that's it. I get it. And as you say, there's the humor, there's other things that you go, oh, okay, right, I didn't think I could say that, but they're saying that, and that's okay. But yeah, I think it is just, yes, every child is different, every journey is different, but there's enough of an overlap that the parents are very open to talk about how what they've come across can sort of benefit you and help you in that journey as well.
Yeah,
That's the.
I reckon
Oh, I
chatting
was
with
going to say that was the perfect ending, but come on in, Steve.
I reckon 90% of what I talk about with parents, they're so similar. It's the
Yeah,
10% that's that can be the big differences, as it were. But no matter whether it's ASD, ADHD, SWAN, PEG-FED, whatever, um, we all have those sort of same needs, frustrations, and it's the subtle differences where you might need more support or not. So no matter your child's needs, we're all pretty much in the same boat in terms of what we're dealing with. And sort of, I think your point, because I don't really use social media, so I never considered podcasts, TikTok, stuff like that, because I'm an old sod. But I think that's a really good way of reaching out to parent carer forums, local authorities could do this sort of stuff. So when you've got that moment on a train journey or at work or whatever, you can see dads talking or direct people to, because I don't use it, so it never comes on my radar. So that's a really good point. Podcast, TikTok, like you do, Tina, stuff like that is, I think that's the easy win for reaching hard to reach parents, but especially dads.
yeah, no, I agree. Well, that is now the perfect ending. Thank you, chaps, for joining me. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, like you said, this somebody's going to listen to this and go, "That's me. I'll go and get some help, or I'll go and talk to somebody. I'm at a low." And
Mm.
hopefully